Admit it, Jake Lockley's reveal in the finale of Moon Knight had us all shook. The show got audiences hooked with its Egyptian mythology-centered plot and Oscar Isaac's amazing performance as Stephen Grant, not to mention finding out about Mark Spector's multiple personality disorder. After we realize there's another personality in the mix, a plot hole comes up in episode 5. Luckily, a producer on Moon Knight clears it all up. Stay tuned for more on this. First up is the Field of Reeds. Once you get sucked into the lore of Moon Knight, there's no going back. Back in episode 5, Mark and Steve get stuck in Duat, the Egyptian afterlife. To get out, Taret tells them they need to balance their hearts on the scales of justice to get to the Field of Reeds so they can get out of there as soon as possible. Now, to do that, they needed their hearts and minds in the right place. In the episode, we find out that both are pretty imbalanced because of hidden memories. So, of course, we get to see a deep psychological dive into Mark Spector. Lots of past childhood memories, all of that. After the fact, we find out Jake Lockley's been hiding in Spector's psyche all along. Fans found a plot hole. Shouldn't Lockley have been revealed in episode 5? On top of that, he was hinted at quite a lot in previous episodes. In all honesty, it makes sense to think so. Lockley is, after all, a suppressed part of Mark Spector. It just doesn't make sense logically for Spector's heart to balance out without bringing Lockley to the surface. Well, Jeremy Slater, a writer on Moon Knight, explains that this was actually some intentional misdirection at play. Next we have the internal journey. Slater explains it as the fact that both of them weren't aware of Jake's existence at the time. The episode, as he calls it, focuses more on their internal journey instead of finding out parts of themselves they weren't aware of. Spector's childhood memories, like the one where his mother blamed him for his brother drowning, weren't things that he had forgotten. These were traumatic events that he was aware of, but pushed them down because they were just too painful, which really gets to us as viewers, honestly. If there's one thing Moon Knight did, it was attack us in the feels. This episode was also mostly about Stephen and Mark coming to terms with their identities. To be specific, the ones they were aware of. We get to know Mark and Steve as their own people, above anything in this one. And now for balancing the scales. There's been a lot of debate around who actually balanced the scales at the end. Yes, Slater clears it up that Jake Lockley couldn't have shown up because he didn't need to, but also offers another insight that fixes this plot hole. A lot of people see it as Mark accepting Stephen's role in the larger scheme of things, but Slater disagrees here. He says it was Stephen who actually balanced the scales out. During the entire episode, Mark already has an idea of who he is and his role within the entire system. It's Steve who finds out he's got to be a protector and a hero. He didn't have a clue about who he was or why he was there. He was very much just going through it. So, in this episode, he's got to step up to his responsibilities, which were thrust upon him without a moment's notice. Of course, he'd be frazzled. Slater says the misdirect is where you think it's Mark who has to deal with the traumatic decision, but it's actually Stephen. With all the actual focus being on Stephen, Jake Lockley's reveal didn't end up being that important at the time. Slater even calls it fun that all of the fans have these theories and they end up arguing about it in his Twitter mentions. And with a storyline like that, of course, you can expect theories to jump up. Next up, still not convinced. With this explanation, we can see why the only important storylines were of Mark's and Stephen's, but fans still aren't convinced, mainly because having another personality banging around in a sarcophagus in Mark's fever dream doesn't seem all too balanced. Even if they weren't aware of Jake Lockley, they should have at least been curious about the third coffin in there, especially when Stephen emerged from one that looked just like it. Apparently, they weren't. Well, Slater's explanation does make sense when you think about it, because the scales of justice required for Stephen and Mark to be balanced as two separate people, not together. When you look at it this way, it does make sense that Jake Lockley wasn't mentioned this early in the series. Plus, Lockley sure looked calm and collected in the post-credits scene of the finale, so maybe he was well balanced enough as he was to keep the scales from tipping over. It was just Mark and Stephen who had to sort themselves out and go on an inner psychological journey. We're pretty sure fans are already at their keyboards figuring out more theories about the show though. Honestly, it's a testament to how good the show really is. If you don't have people jumping to figure out the plot, then you're not doing something right. Luckily, Moon Knight's got themselves covered on this front. Now, in other news, new Madam Web cast. Marvel isn't slowing down with the new releases. This one isn't a Disney Plus joint though. Madam Web is the star-studded ensemble that Sony's doing with Marvel, and the cast is absolutely crazy. We just got to know that Emma Roberts got cast in a major role in it too. The movie focuses on being the origin story for the comic book character named Madam Web. She's a clairvoyant who can see within the spider world, and yes, she and Spider-Man link up in the comics a lot. Her powers prove beneficial for him, and they go on a lot of adventures together. The movie's set to release in July 2023, so production is underway at the moment. Not only has a huge name like Emma Roberts signed onto this one, but Sydney Sweeney's in it too. That's right, the Euphoria star we all know and love is making her Marvel debut here. Dakota Johnson's set to play Madam Web herself, and we're really loving the girl power in this casting. For real, putting these three together in a movie is a surefire way to success. The only thing is that Sony's Marvel releases have been a little disappointing. We're talking about Morbius here. But hey, new storyline, new characters, fingers crossed for this one. And next, Andrew Garfield returns to Marvel. Yep, you heard it right. After his iconic comeback in Spider-Man No Way Home, audiences have been begging to see him come back as the Amazing Spider-Man. Well, Garfield might be done with that role, but that doesn't mean he's not up for more. Giant Freakin' Robot confirmed from its trustworthy sources that yes, Garfield signed the dotted line for more Marvel movies. Since it's not the Amazing Spider-Man, audiences are now wondering what kind of role he's gonna play. Kevin Feige hinted that the next phase of the MCU will be based on the 2015 comic crossover called Secret Wars. It's a huge event and brings in different timelines as well, many more than what's been shown in the Multiverse of Madness. Marvel really is going to take it up a notch here, casting and storyline wise. The main characters in Secret Wars are all different versions of the main superheroes. For example, there's a police force of different types of Thor, the lovable god of thunder. It's not far off to say we might see him play another version of Spider-Man, just like he did in the latest movie. And finally, Chris Evans as Wolverine? Though we saw Captain America have his happily ever after with Peggy Carter in Endgame, fans still aren't finished with his storyline. Of course, we all want to see more Chris Evans on the screen. The Russo brothers are right there with us, it seems. In an interview, they described what role Evans would play best in the latest MCU phase. Since Marvel's merger with 20th Century Fox, the X-Men are actually part of the Marvel Universe now. This leads to a lot of awesome possibilities. Joe Russo actually describes one of them, Chris Evans as Wolverine. Russo said that Evans has great body control, but is also really energetic on set. He's nothing like the staunch and stoic Captain America, so it'll be great to see him in a different kind of role. Apparently, Wolverine is what came to mind for him. Chris Evans himself isn't opposed to the idea of coming back. He's pretty on board for it actually. He said that he'd love to play Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four again. Now that Marvel's making their own Fantastic Four movie, the avenues are wide open for Evans to make a comeback as a different character. He even said that coming back as Storm would be better than coming back as Cap. There's more to do with that role for him. We can just imagine, he'd been playing Captain America for years. Let's just hope something gets sorted and we get to see him in a new role soon. There are plenty of opportunities. That's all for today's video. What do you think of Jeremy Slater's explanation for the Moon Knight plot hole? Are you convinced? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and we'll see you in the next video.